History of Exchange Server 2007 and 2010. So this is getting more interested when we are learning new features and new versions and getting to know about the history. So Exchange Server 2007 was introduced in late 2006 to business customers, and there was no front end and back end concept. So if you remember, in our previous lesson, we saw that there was like back end role and front end role in Exchange Server 2003, but with Exchange Server 2007 there was 5 roles introduced, and one of those roles was a mailbox role, and then it was hub transport role, and client access role, the other one was edge transport role, and the last one was unified messaging role. So Exchange Server 2007 had like 5 different roles, and mailbox role, the mailbox role, all your mailboxes, all your databases, all your storage logs were just stored in your mailbox role server. So this mailbox role server was responsible for storing all your databases and your mailboxes, like all your emails that you create on Exchange Server. All of them was just storing in your mailbox server role. And then we had hub transport role. Hub transport role was responsible to do the transportation of email inside your organization. If you ask me a question now, that when you say that inside your organization, does it mean that it can only send and receive your emails inside your organization? Can it do it for outside? So the answer is yes. So most organization at that time, like when they had Exchange Server 2007 and they still have Exchange Server 2007, they were making sure that the cost of their implementation or the design is not gonna go high. That's why they were using hub transport to do the both internal and external email transportation. So let me quickly give you a example. So if you have a company where you have 1000 user accounts and all of them needs a mailbox, and your company says that I can only buy 2 servers to do the implementation of Exchange Server 2007. So the first thing that you will do is you will use the first server to install Active Directory, because Active Directory or domain controller is the requirement for Exchange Server 2007. And then the second server that you will use is as a Exchange server, where you will install mailbox server role, transport role, and then client access role. So you are installing all these 3 roles in one server, and then you are using this transport server role to connect it to your firewall, and then your firewall is connected on the internet. So this transport server role is now getting emails, like user from outside sends an email, it comes to the internet, comes to your firewall just send it to your hub transport role checks it, and then send it to mailbox server role checks that if that user account or the receiver mailbox is here or not, it checks it, sends it back to hub transport, and hub transport sends it to the user. So that's how it was working, and it can work. So here what are you doing is you're saving some money. So you're saving money here, so this is less cost. But the thing is that edge transport server role that you see in here, this server role is actually designed by Microsoft to do the transportation of emails for outside, for external emails, like sending emails to outside, receiving emails from outside. This Edge Transport Server role is more secure because there were like built-in anti-spam uh, features that you were using to make sure that it is secure. So this was the only difference. And then with the Hub Transport role, in order to in order to have the anti-spam and antivirus features to do the filtering, you had to install a separate plugin in Hub Transport role. So Microsoft don't recommend you to use transport server role as a external email server to do the transportation, but still you can use it, and you could use it at that time. So the other thing that you had at that time was client access server role. So client access server role was one of the servers that you were able to install on the same server where you have transport role or mailbox server role, so they can all be installed together at the same time. And client access server role was responsible to give you access to Outlook web access, and then all clients that you had at that time, the connection between the client and Exchange server was established through client access server role through using ActiveSync, which we are gonna see in our practical lesson. So client access server role was responsible to give you access to Outlook web access, offline address books, and the other thing which is very important is connecting you to Exchange server. That's why when you have Outlook open, it says connected to Microsoft Exchange. So my question in here is, what if I don't have client access server role? I only have transport role and mailbox server role. Is it gonna work? The answer is no, it's not gonna work. Your clients will show as disconnected and they will not be able to send and receive emails. So in Exchange Server 2007, mailbox, client access, and transport role, they were the main parts that you were required to install in order to make your Exchange server work properly. Without these three, your Exchange server was nothing. So one other thing that is left is unified messaging role. Unified messaging role was used at that time for voicemails, for like calling, all like it was like voicemail integration service, and unified messaging actually was added, and the unified messaging role was used to do all those kind of things, like uh, having your own phone system and then your PBX, and then your unified messaging role was like storing voicemails, like doing the routing, and you were able to just set up an entire environment for your calling system actually. So one of the other improvements that they made was like they improved search, and they added better filtering options, and they support for web services. And another good thing was that they changed the interface for Outlook web access. It was totally changed, and it was like good looking Outlook web access interface. So one other thing that you see in here is they also added some security features. They did some security enhancement where they added anti-spam features, and through this anti-spam features you were able to block a domain, block a user account. For example, every morning this user comes and check his email addresses. He's receiving like taxi at yours.com, and they are offering him different things and he don't really like it. So what he's gonna do is he's gonna tell the administrator, and then the administrator is gonna use the security feature of Exchange Server 2007 to block this entire email address and then the domain. So you can block domains, you can block email addresses, you can do all those things if you want. So this was also one of the other things, like the engine for security was stronger, where it was able to catch junk emails and then send it to junk and then make sure that the viruses are not coming in, and then if someone is sending viruses, it's just deleted before it just goes to the user. And then the introduction of SCR clustering, CCR and LCR clustering feature. This was another thing that was added in Exchange Server 2007, where you were able to do with, for example, with LCR that you see in here, this feature was with Exchange Server 2007 Service Pack 1, where you were able to configure LCR between two mailbox databases, if or servers actually, not databases, where you were able to configure it. So if one of the servers goes down, you were able to configure, you were able to just use the other server. And then SCR and CCR clustering was one of the other clustering features that was introduced in Exchange Server 2007. So one of the greatest features that was added was Exchange Management Shell, where you were able to configure your Exchange server using prompt command lines, actually commands. So for example, if you want to create a new mailbox, if you want to just configure a mailbox role, hub transport role, whatever you want to do, like whatever you were able to do in Exchange console through the graphic, you were able to do it through management shell. And most of the features that you were able to do in Exchange Management Shell through commands, you were not able to do with Exchange Server 2007 graphic interface. So that was another good thing. And then they also had Exchange Management Console, and this console was just to load your Exchange Server 2007 like a Microsoft Management Console that you have. And then they also had transport rules, where with transport rules you were able to configure different rules. For example, if an email comes from outside with an attachment of a Word file which is named as sorry.docx, and then the sender is sorry.com, block that email. So you were able to configure different rules based on emails, based on domains, based on attachments, and there were many and many different options, different rules, set of rules that you were able to use to block, allow, and set up different type of rules for that. So this was the history of Exchange Server 2007, and you also saw that what features it had at that time. And then the other thing that we have is Exchange Server 2010. So Exchange Server 2010 came up with one of the greatest improvements, where you were able to configure role-based access control. And the permission model in Exchange Server 2010 actually is called role-based access control. So the key element to role-based access control is that it allows fine-grained adjustments, so that you can easily control the level of permission assigned to your users and administrators. For example, if you have a help desk and then your help desk needs to manage recipients, you can configure your help desk to have permissions to recipient portion only. So you are very specific with the permissions. Actually, to which server you want to give access to your help desk, to which part you want to give access to your help desk. It's all in your hand, and this is done through role-based access control. So role-based access control is really good. Like in Exchange Server 2000 and 2003, if you remember, permissions were assigned via delegation wizard, and it was in Exchange System Console, Manager Console, and the delegation wizard allowed the administrators to assign one of the three roles to user that they wish to grant administrative access. So there was like Exchange View only administrator, Exchange administrator, and then Exchange full administrator. So once you add a user member of one of those roles, that user had access over all your Exchange servers in your organization, which is a bad thing. So you want the user to have access to one of your servers, not all of your servers. So that was one of the greatest improvements that they made with your Exchange server. So other thing that they introduced was database availability group, DAG. This is called DAG. So DAG was really a great solution to make sure that you no longer need to have clustering, like configure CCR, SCR, and have like extra overhead to do that. So Exchange DAG was used in your environment, and then that was configured like this. So for example, if you have a mailbox server 1, mailbox server 2, and you have a database here, database here, database here, and here, what you were doing was you were configuring DAG between this database and, like, for example, for this and this and this and this. What they were doing was they're creating a copy of the database on the other mailbox server, and then, like, for example, this was creating here, this was creating here. So you had two different databases, so a copy of your database. So you were having a copy of your database on another server, and then, for example, one of these databases gets corrupted, you still have the other database working. So this database that you have in here and in here, what they were doing was one of them was active and one of them was passive. So this database was sending a heartbeat and asking this active, are you alive, are you alive? For example, this database goes down or gets corrupted, this is not gonna respond, and then this database, if this database didn't get any response, this database will think that it's down or something happened, so it will become active. So users will still be connected to your database, uh, to their database, and they will not see or they will not face any downtime, because DAG is working fine, and it's just giving the database services without any interruptions. So that was one of the good things with Exchange Server 2010. And then they had integrated archiving and retention. So with your Exchange Server 2010 was having integrated archiving, where it was always archiving all your messages. For example, if you lose your messages, if you lose your emails from your Outlook, you still have your archive where you were able to just retrieve your messages again. And then you had integrated retention, so where you had different retention policies, and it was integrated with Exchange Server 2010, where you had integration policy. For example, delete messages after 120 days, delete like messages that is deleted by the user after 60 days. So these were different retention policies where you were deciding where you are deciding like for how long should I keep the messages, and after how many days the messages should be deleted. So limited end user disruption when moving mailboxes. So this is another great feature. So whenever you are trying to move your mailboxes from one mailbox to another mailbox, or from one mailbox actually sorry from one mailbox database to another mailbox database, you had you have less disruption. And most of the time when users are having a situation like that where administrator is moving their mailboxes from one database to another database, they're even not feeling it that uh, if their mailboxes is being moved. So this is another great feature that we have with Exchange Server 2010. So Exchange Server 2010 is still the latest Exchange Server, and it is being used by many organizations, and everyone likes Exchange Server 2010, but most organizations have already upgraded to Exchange Server 2013. And if you say why, we're gonna see it on our next slide. So I hope that you learned something, and I'll see you in a next video. Let me know if you have any questions.